Hey everybody, welcome back to the Historian's Craft. So in this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about this book. So this is The Ransom of the Soul, Afterlife and Wealth in Early Western Christianity by Peter Brown. So at this point, if you've been following the channel for a while, Peter Brown is a name that you probably know. He is by far one of the most prolific historians, one of the most prolific scholars on late antiquity, and he's basically been credited with, creating that whole area as a field in its own right. So, this is by far one of the most interesting books I've read in a while, and it's for the following reason. So, no matter what period you study, it doesn't matter what, it could be modern Japanese history, it could be modern China, it could be whatever. The more in-depth with that period you go, the more you notice that these things that we call, dividing lines and, concrete periods, the Muromachi period, the Sengoku Jidai, the early Edo period for Japanese history, etc., they're not these concrete units of time. People in my country don't just wake up in the late 1770s and say, oh, well, I guess we're American now because the revolution is breaking out. The more you look at it, it's more of an ongoing process. And what Peter Brown is arguing in this book, is that the dividing line between late antiquity and the early medieval period isn't concrete. Like anything else, it's a slowly changing series of events and how people perceive themselves to be living in the world. So with that in mind, one of the ways he goes about investigating how people change their mentality, how people went from understanding that they live in late antiquity to living in the early medieval period, this kind of post-Roman era, is through an investigation of basically what people thought happened to them after they died. What happened to the soul. So the ancient Romans, broadly speaking, believed two things. The first thing they believed is that if you were wealthy, that is, a member of the aristocracy, or if you were virtuous, if you were honorable, if you were good, whatever we want to think that means. When you die, your soul leaves the body, and it goes to reside in the Milky Way, up in the sky, up in what the Romans would conceive of eventually as their version of heaven. But it was only the wealthy, it was only the virtuous. The average person doesn't have this happen to them. Now, if you jump forward to the late 600s, like the late 670s, 680s, this guy in, Spain, Julian, he's the bishop of Toledo. He wrote this little book, this little tiny little pamphlet thing called the Prognosticon Futuri. And this is how Brown opens his book. And what the Prognosticon Futuri does, is Julian is trying to demonstrate to his friend that when his friend dies, because he's in that process, when he passes away, his soul is going to leave his body, and everything's going to be alright. He's going to be fine. He's going to go up to heaven. Now, in doing that, Julian outlines the beliefs of church fathers, all the way from the original apostles to Tertullian, to himself, writing in 1688. So, in doing that, and Brown makes this very clear, what Julian thought he was doing was outlining a concrete system of beliefs that everybody he was writing about, kind of conceived of the afterlife and what happens to the soul after death in the same way. But when you actually read the text, what you realize is that the text preserves a record of shifting ideas about what happens to the soul after death, and how that idea evolved as Christianity came into the Roman Empire, as the Roman Empire became Christianized, and as more and more intellectuals entered the religion. So, as Christianity spread across the Roman Empire in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, into the 4th centuries, it attracts a lot of different converts. Now, those converts are initially poor people, the downtrodden. There were a lot of women, a lot of beggars, what we think of as the lower ranks of society. And eventually they attract the aristocracy. Now, when they do that, the religion has to start answering these not-so-easy questions that Roman and Greek philosophy had attempted to answer beforehand. So, what? And the answer is that that whole idea with the virtuous, those people without sin, going up to the Milky Way when they die. Early Christianity takes that and it understands people who are virtuous, those without sin, to go to heaven when they die, which everybody accepts, and then everybody who is wicked goes to hell. But the problem, okay, that the religion has to deal with, this is like the bulk of the book, is, well, what about the average guy? The person that's, like, not entirely free of sin, but the person that's not entirely bad either, right? Because in Christianity, especially in early Christianity, the belief set was that baptism washes away the original sin of Adam, but through daily life, everybody falls in little tiny imperceptible ways. So does this mean that throughout your life, little tiny imperceptible sins just build up and build up and build, right? Maybe you tell like a white lie, or you don't tell your mother you love her, or something else that we don't really think about as being a sin. But gradually, these little things build up. Well, when you die, does the weight of all those little tiny sins, does that mean you don't go to heaven? Does that mean you go to hell? This was a seriously troubling question. So Brown traces the answer for us in this book, and in doing so, he outlines how people in Western Europe specifically, but also the Mediterranean more broadly, go from understanding themselves to be living in the late Roman Empire to be living in the post-Roman world, in early medieval Europe. So the Christian church then has to start dealing with this idea of the not bad people, the people that aren't holy, but the people that aren't, like, totally evil sinners either. And because of that, because they have to deal with this issue, there's a lot of fighting among church fathers over how exactly you deal with this, because it affects church doctrine. It depends what you read in the Bible, it depends how you interpret it. And then we have, in this period, we have stuff floating around that doesn't quite make it into the official Christian canon, like the Gospel of Judas, other various fragments of small texts that have come down to us which present different ideas. There are different sects of Christianity that have to be ironed out. So in modern Catholicism, there's this idea of purgatory, this waiting zone, this thing where you go to when you die, which the soul enters after death, and then you have to wait there before you enter heaven. This period, late antiquity, is when that idea starts. And initially, some church fathers argue that, well, purgatory is a period of purifying fire which burns away all those little tiny micro sins that you build up over a lifetime, and once you go through that purging fire, you're okay to enter heaven. Gradually, though, that idea turns from this brief period where all your sins are burned away to an actual long period of waiting. But then the question becomes, okay, well, how long do you wait? Well, it's not certain, but maybe, and this is the key thing with the book, this is where the subtitle, Afterlife and Wealth in Early Western Christianity, comes into play. Maybe, depending on what you do in this life, maybe there's a way to speed up that waiting period. Now, the answer to that question that early Christian church fathers come up with is, yes, there is a way. It's not giving bribes to the church, the thing that pisses off Martin Luther in the 1500s and then starts the Protestant Reformation. Instead, what speeds it up is not bribes, but two other interconnected things. What speeds up that period of waiting is first a donation of land and other resources by the uber wealthy of the Roman world to the church, and this is for two purposes. Purpose number one, the giving of resources to the Christian church. This means that that church, no matter where it is, it now has the resources to give alms to the poor, something that the Gospels tell you should do. And because the poor in this period take on a holy aspect in late antiquity, right, the kingdom of the gods will be inherited by the meek and all that, this is a good thing for the here and now. This is a good thing to do. And purpose number two, okay, using your wealth for good deeds in this lifetime. And people genuinely believe they saw this in real time as wealth was being donated to the church. What that means is that your heavenly palace is being constructed as you give wealth away. You're building yourself a better life in the next round. When you die and go to heaven, you'll have something actually there for you. It means that you're able to partly wash away your daily sins, not via bribes, but via, like, charity, because you're giving resources to be used by the poor. It becomes a moral job of the late antique Roman wealthy to care for the poor in the here and now. Now, with that in mind, the other thing Brown deals with in this book is, well, what if you want to do that, but you don't have wealth to give? Are you screwed then? Are you destined to die and then go to purgatory because you don't have money in the here and now in this physical world to donate to the church? To build your heavenly palace? Well, the answer that a lot of late antique church fathers come up with is, well, no. The answer for the non-wealthy people is that the dead need the living to act on their behalf. The living have to go to cemeteries and shrines and pray for the dead. So what this does, okay, and this is part of the intellectual shift, is it marks out a shift in how people in the late Roman Empire, specifically Roman Christians, understood death and the use of space, like cemeteries, in their world. So the intellectual arguments, which continue after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and we see this specifically in like Gaul, with Gallic bishops at the frontier, dealing with this whole idea of frontier collapse and the creation of successor states. Into that mix comes something else, something from very far away, something from out of the Roman world, to the northwest. Out of Ireland comes this idea of daily confession. So when that gets mixed with everything else going on, this idea that you have to, daily go to the church, you have to daily confess your micro sins to the priest, we come to a new, distinctly medieval conception of death and the afterlife, which marks out the journey of the soul in Christianity. So what does that look like? And the answer is that for many in the Roman world, death was not evil, death was unclean. Cemeteries exist outside of cities, you bury the dead, you don't necessarily go there, but late antique Christians believe that because this is where the holy reside, this is where saints are buried, this is where martyrs are buried, you go there, you feel some kind of presence of the saint, of the martyr. And if you pray at their shrine, at their tomb, you are basically giving your own power in the here and now to souls in purgatory to help them on their way. Now, when that gets combined with daily confession and the giving of wealth to churches to basically create a system whereby you can give alms to the poor, it creates a new system, a new power structure in Christianity that didn't exist when the religion first cropped up. And that is really what starts to mark out the early medieval period from the late antique one. So basically then, the more alms you give to the poor, the more prayers you do, essentially the more you try to actively be what many would consider in this life to be a good person, the better off you'll be in both this life and the next. And that's what makes this book so important, because many works tell us about the how this happened, how Christians came to understand their changing world, but this one tries to explain the why. So if you guys are interested in early Christianity, you need to pick this up. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Take care, and I will see you all next time.